Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming out and joining us here for our qualitative lunch research our lunch series, which explores the importance of ethics and qualitative research. This is the third installment of our QualLab Lunch series. My name is Bakari Lumumba, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Our Qual Lunch series are a series of lunches that offer information about an important qualitative topic, such as anti-racist research designs, ethics and ethnographic research, how to obtain grants with a qualitative design, and more. Today, we have a research team from The Ohio State University, which consists of Dr. Leslie C. Moore, who is an applied linguist and linguistic anthropologist. Her research examines the social and cultural patterning of learning and language development in communities whose members use multiple languages and participate in multiple learning traditions. She currently has two projects concerned with linguistic diversity and educational context. One project focuses on informal science learning or dual language learners from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. The other project examines adult assessments of Black children's narrative language. For both projects, she has collaborated with partners who bring to the work expertise and experiences different from and complementary to her own. Our second member of the research team is Dr. Ann Allen. Dr. Allen is an associate professor of educational policy in the Department of Educational Studies in the College of Education and Human Ecology here at The Ohio State University. Her research examines school governance reforms, such as charter schools, considering such issues as representation and democratic practice. She is also interested in school-community relationships and the interplay between politics, and policy. Last but not least, we have Dr. Lee. He is a tenured professor in the Department of Human Services at The Ohio State University. He received his PhD in sports pedagogy in 2004 and his master's in science degree in experimental statistics in 2003 from Louisiana State University. His research centers on student motivation, weight-related teasing and coping, and lifestyle interventions, and its impact on K-12 students' health and cognition academic achievement. Dr. Lee has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and abstracts, 5 chapters and edited books, 1 book and 1 edited book, and 6 technical reports. He is currently also a research fellow in the Curriculum and Instruction Young Scholar here at The Ohio State University. Please welcome our guests, our panelists.
Thank you, Bakari. I'm Dr. Leslie Moore, and I am, in a sense, after Bakari, your host. I got together this group of 3 from the different departments in our college because I wanted to bring us together as a college, and because I think we do come, although we're all qualitative researchers, we are coming from different perspectives because of the academic spaces that we inhabit most of the time. So I want to thank Dr. Ann Allen and Dr. Weidong Lee for joining me. We had not worked together previously, and I really enjoyed this opportunity to talk with you all about these issues. And we've been having one face-to-face meeting and a lot of back and forth by email, and it's been really engaging and worthwhile for me, and I thank you for that. And I hope the results today will be engaging and worthwhile for all of you. I am working across 2 screens that are being a little bit stubborn, so bear with me as I share my PowerPoint screen. Let's see if we're going to get the right thing. Yeah, what are you guys seeing right now? Are you seeing a slideshow? As a slideshow? Awesome. Okay, so I'm the opener, and my goal is really to sort of frame the discussion today. We had gone back and forth about how we were organizing in terms of interactivity, and I think our final conclusion, given the numbers we think we may end up with today, it will be interaction through chats. So it won't be the small group breakouts we're anticipating, but I think Bakari will keep you all involved, and you will definitely have a way to interact with us and with each other. So I'm focusing on the connections research, ethics, and IRB. As it happens, Dr. Allen and I are both IRB members. I've been serving since 2013. Dr. Allen, when did you join?
I think it was 2018.
Okay, so you're also getting well seasoned by this point. It takes a while to get your groove with serving on the IRB, I will say. And the reason I wanted to start with this framing of the connection between research ethics and IRB is that sometimes the IRB processes can feel not connected to ethics in the way that they truly are. And so let's talk about this distinction that is sometimes made in discussions around ethical research practice. Think of procedural ethics, which IRB review is the classic example of procedural ethics. This is where things are highly regulated, and there are these very clear processes for how to determine whether someone is engaging in and will engage in ethical practice. As I just noted, some aspects of the IRB application process can feel irrelevant or ill-fitting to qualitative researchers' work. This has been an issue across academy for many years. OSU has done a lot of work to make the social sciences IRB, not the medical, be better fitting with qualitative research, with ethnographic research. There are still a lot of challenges because there's so much federal regulation on how IRBs function. And federal regulation focuses overwhelmingly on medical research. That's the main stuff that they're concerned with. But I think our institution is working hard on that. And we have several qualitative researchers on the IRB currently. So that is good. Now, the other type of ethical practice, we think of as situational ethics or practical ethics. And these are the difficult, subtle, and usually unpredictable situations that arise during research practice. This is the stuff of, this is the daily life. This is the lived experience of doing ethical research. Now, ethical judgments you're engaging in them all the time on a situation to situation basis, and even on a moment to moment basis. Right? And I think those of you who are already practicing researchers, you know this. And I do want to say, hey, IRB reviewers know this too. We are also researchers. We are only empowered to work at a procedural ethical level. We are only empowered to look at what you say you're planning to do. We have to great extent trust that you are going to conduct yourself ethically, and we do. That's our assumption. A lot of what we are looking for when we review applications is these clear indicators that you know what's important to be considering as you make these ethical decisions all throughout the research process. So one of the things I would hope that you take away from this brief intro is that one goal of IRB review is to sensitize you to ethical issues that you may not have thought of. You can be a very ethical person and not think of every single possible ethical issue that might arise. And part of IRB is to make you think about those things. So please encourage you to take that orientation. And one little more plug on IRB. One of the things I'm trying to get the word out in EHE about IRB and ORRP, the Office of Responsible Research Practices, is if during your application process you're dealing with problems with the modifications, they really do want you to call them. So call them up. One phone call can work out a lot of issues that a string of emails is not going to resolve. So just let me make that little push. All right, moving on. So 3 core principles inform IRB and research ethics, right? Respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And these 3 core principles are guides for researchers to address initial and ongoing tensions between the needs and the goals of the researcher or research self and the rights of participants. And I just want to run through these real quickly, again, as a reminder, because these 3 core principles really cover a lot of ground. So first of all, respect for persons. Yeah, this is 2 pieces to this. Individuals are and should be treated as autonomous agents. This has been challenged as a cross-cultural issue, that the way we conceive of individuals as autonomous agents can vary culturally, and that indeed is true. The other part is individuals with any sort of diminished autonomy due to youth, illness, mental disability, or restricted liberty should receive additional protections. So essentially what respect for person means is that you're recognizing the authority of an individual's preferences and choices about their life. And in IRB processes, respect for persons is primarily expressed through meaningful and voluntary informed consent. You will notice I did not just say informed consent. I said meaningful and voluntary informed consent. And that's something that we can get into more detail, but particularly for qualitative work, that can be really important. It's important for any research, but we're talking to this audience. I want to spin out a little bit on informed consent because this is a very, very big issue. There are three key features: disclose to potential participants all the info they need to make an informed decision, facilitate their understanding of what you have disclosed, and promote the voluntariness of the decision they make about whether or not to participate in the research. And all of these seem sort of self-evident, and this shouldn't be a problem. It can be more complicated than it looks on the surface. And again, that we may be getting into that today. Most important point I want to make about informed consent is that it is an ongoing process. It is not just a form. It is not a single event, right? Consent must be revisited and maintained over time as research relationships transform and as types of the information being shared change. This is really important in qualitative, ethnographic, especially work, longitudinal work. Researchers often become close to their participants in various ways, and participants may begin sharing information that they don't think of as being data. And it is up to the researcher's responsibility to keep checking in with people about what's data and what's being shared in some non-research way. And that's just one dimension of the complexities. Now, beneficence, that's the principle 2. And that's maximizing possible benefits for society and research participants and minimizing the possible harm to participants. In a lot of qualitative work, the primary risks, possible harms have to do with exposure of their data, but it can also be that just by participating in the interviews or whatever kind of data collection you're doing can cause emotional distress to participants. Those are the issues that you're probably used to addressing in your IRB applications and in your practice, right? The principle of beneficence has to be considered throughout the research enterprise at every stage. And in qualitative research, decisions about beneficence often are not made only by the researchers, right? Notions about reciprocity. Who decides what it means to give back? The researcher may think one thing counts as giving back, and research participants may see it very differently. Different research participants may see that very differently. And in collaboration, that's another important dimension of a lot of qualitative research. With whom are we collaborating? How are we collaborating with them, and for what purposes? I know in my own work in the museum world, in the informal science world, I have my community partners who are COSI, Head Start, Columbus City Schools. But how about the parents and the children with whom I am doing the research? They are not conceptualized as community partners as we think about community partnerships, but I need to actually be thinking about them as partners in this research too, and not just subjects, as we used to say in the past. Third core principle is justice, and that is essentially about the fairness of distribution of research benefits and burdens. Questions of justice and equal treatment are critical, particularly in the selection of participants, right? That's the main phase of research where this plays out, but not the only phase. Investigators must not offer potentially beneficial research only to some groups, right? And they should not select only accessible, vulnerable, or disadvantaged groups for research that involves high risk or little prospect of direct benefit. And this can be very tricky in the sense that some of the populations that are least researched, and there's a need for research in that area, they are not very accessible. They may be vulnerable, they may be disadvantaged in various senses, and there may be risks involved, particularly we think about children of undocumented immigrants. That is a very complicated space in terms of vulnerability, but also these are folks that there needs to be more work with how they can be better served by educational institutions, right? So this work of justice and beneficence can get very, very complicated when we think about the real risks to participants versus how much benefit they will directly experience from our research. So, as I've noted already, ethical issues arise in every phase of research. When you're designing it, when you're applying for your IRB, when you're recruiting participants, when you're doing informed consent, when you're engaged in collaboration, reciprocation, data collection, data analysis, reporting and disseminating. Some of these phases are temporally bound, right? When you do the IRB application, that is a bound event, right? It may take a while, but once it happens, it's done. Of course, there are amendments. And then recruitment also, once you've recruited somebody, that's happened. But many phases in research are not so temporally bound, right? As we noted already, informed consent is an ongoing process, not an event. Collaboration and reciprocation are ongoing. They can change over time in significant ways. Probably need to be checking in with people on that you're working with on these points. So the ethical questions don't just happen when you decide, here's how we're doing it. There may be questions arising as things unfold and change over time. So that's it for me in terms of framing. And I think we'll go straight to Anne as opposed to taking questions, because I think the questions will come up as we get into some more specific, concrete examples. Dr. Allen.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Moore. That was really great. And just as an IRB member, I have to underscore how important all of this really is. The ideas of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice are going to flow through all of the slides that you see today. I wanted to focus primarily on what we do with the data when we collect it and what are the ethical concerns that we see there. So one of the things I wanted to start with were some thoughts actually from Donna Mertens, who wrote a chapter in the ethical use of qualitative data and findings in SAGE's handbook, qualitative data analysis. And there were a couple of questions there that I thought were really useful. And one of them was for us to think about what responsibility we have to try to change things when we see injustices. So when we bear witness to racism, ableism, autism, or sexism, what do we do as researchers? What can we do? And another question she asks is, how can we design, conduct, and use our research to facilitate the type of social change that we're looking to impact? And then the third question that she asks, that I think is really useful, is what happens to our research once it's left our hands, and how do we control that? What can we do about that? Those are questions that have come up for me in my research, and I'd like to share a couple of examples of those with you. I had some other questions that I wanted to add to the mix before I get into some of those cases. So just thinking about my own work and my own qualitative work, these are questions that come up for me. So what responsibility do we have in using the stories or experiences of others? They are giving us an ability to think about their own experiences and use those experiences to help others. And so what is our responsibility in carrying their voices? What's your role as a researcher and a member of the research community surrounding your project? And this ties right into Dr. Moore's discussion of beneficence. What is that relationship? And what are our responsibilities with that relationship? The next one too, what power do research participants have? What power do you have as a researcher? Consider your research participants' vulnerabilities. I think that's important. And then thinking about how might your respondents be harmed by the way you write, disseminate, or discuss your findings. We like to think about our research as having benefits, but we also have to know that we carry power in the work that we do, and we have to think about how we can minimize those harms and protect our participants. And finally, what do you do if you do discover an injustice, and how do you bring that injustice to light? So I'd like to share some cases with you. Just some things that I came across in my work. This is a case that happened to me early on in my research, and I was actually flabbergasted. So I was looking at issues of representation in school governance as the charter school movement was coming about. And so what I did is I observed a series of charter school board meetings across different schools. In one school I went into, literally, the place was locked. The meeting was on the second floor. I literally had to yell up to an open window on the second floor to allow them to let me in so I could conduct this observation. Present were 5 board members and myself, and it was noted that I was the only person in the school's 4-year history to ever attend a school's board meeting. As I mentioned, it was on the second floor of a locked school building, and the meeting that I attended centered around the issue of of incompliance with an ADA issue. There was no elevator in the building, and one of the students, it was a Montessori school, and they had the upper grades on the second floor and the early L on the first floor. And as the student was moving up to the second floor grades, there was no access for her. So the discussion was, what do? We don't have an elevator. We don't have money for an elevator. And the board decided that the only thing that they could do at that time was to counsel the student and parents out of that school. And so I'm going to leave that with you to think about what do you do as a researcher with when that information happens. Clearly that was, to me, that struck me as an injustice. And so we can think about maybe a little bit later what happens there. I actually, just to let you know, I had a conversation with the board president after that meeting and brought this to light. Somebody tell me if I run out of time. I have a couple other pieces here. This is another case where this was a case where I was working with a student, and the student was conducting research on parent and student satisfaction in schools of choice. And part of that work was being done with a private research organization, or you might call it a think tank, which was funding the work. And the research findings suggested there were mixed findings in terms of satisfaction, but the report that was published and supported by the organization showed a very clear positive response. And the student was quite upset. That wasn't the work that she presented to the foundation. And so then the question is, how might we think about the work once it leaves our hands? How do we control it, and can we control it? And then what do you do as a researcher? The last case that I wanted to throw at you was related to a case that was also done with a student thinking about some issues that were happening in a local school district. And so there were a series of interviews done with parents and teachers around equity concerns. And the data suggests that there were some policies related to a particular administrator that were actually causing some issues. The student researcher had agreed to share findings with this particular administrator as part of the project, and was very nervous about sharing that data with the administrator, and really struggled with how to present that information. So again, this becomes an ethical question of what do you do with the data that's been shared with you, with the voices that's been shared with you, and how can you present that to different audiences? So just to give you there is no clear answer to these questions, and I'm sorry for that, but these are really complicated issues, and especially when you're in the midst of it. But here are some things to think about. Don't share your data in any way that's not approved or consented by your respondents. And Dr. Moore already discussed that, but that's really important. If you see an injustice, consider how you might move forward with that action that's not going to harm your respondents. Are there ways that you might engage with the people who have power to bring to light some of these issues? Don't make promises to research participants that you can't keep. So there's only so much you can control. So make sure that you are not promising that the findings will be used in any specific particular way. Don't make promises to funders or sponsors. That's really important. Understand where your money is coming from and understand what interests come with that money, and make sure that that you are clear in how you will or will not use that research and use that funding. Finally, think ahead about the power relationships involved with the research project. That includes the sponsors, researchers, respondents, audiences that are going to read or engage in your research, publishers. How will your data and findings be presented, disseminated, and used? So those are some questions that you can think about when you're thinking about ethics. Now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Weidong in
Dr. Lee, do you want to take over control of the screen?
Sure.
Okay, I will stop screen sharing.
Let me.
So.
Just to give all the participants a reminder that if you have any questions, you could please feel free to share those in the chat. And when we get to the question and answer section of our series today, we will make sure that we're able to have the panelists answer your questions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ann, also Dr. Leslie. Dr. Leslie talked about core principles that you can use to make ethical decisions in your research. Dr. Ann also discussed some ethical issues from her work, and also presented many questions for us to think about when we're doing research related to ethical decisions. Today, my talk will be mainly talk about some ethical decisions that I had to make during my research. It's not easy. It wasn't easy decision to make. A lot of times we have to ask ourselves a very, very hard question. Later on, I'm going to use some examples, specific studies to demonstrate how difficult it is. So two studies I'm going to talk about. One is, we propose a study to look at physical activity, how physical activity impact children's executive functions. Mainly, we want to look at whether children can, obtain some cognitive benefits by engaging in physical activity. Excuse me, I'm coughing a little bit. I don't have COVID-19, but please excuse me. And the second study I'm going to talk about, it's a qualitative study that we did. We interviewed big size students and also their parents about their teasing experience. Because as you know, overweight students, or maybe students with who are overweight, will experience a lot of teasing in school, and also especially in physical education, in physical activity settings. So I'm going to use those two studies, look at some ethical decisions I made doing my research. So the first one, when we look at brain functions, it's very important for us to know how physical activity impact children's brain functions. As we all know, about over 30% of children who right now in the United States are overweight. About 15% are obese. So we, according to physical activity guidelines for America, the guidelines recommend children to be physically active, at least maybe 60 minutes moderate to vigorous exercise per day, right? To be able to obtain some basic health benefits. This study is very significant because we not just look at how physical activity impact children's health, but also want to look at how it impact children's cognitive function in terms of dose effect. how much is enough? How much dose? How much benefit? Right? How many benefit children can gain? Well, to measure brain functions of children, of course, there are computerized testing we can do, but the more valid, reliable measure is having children go through functional MRI, right? So everybody know probably what is functional MRI. When I write up my study, IRB application, and I really thought about, because when I went to psychology building and look at functional MRI, there's some radiation, but it's below the level that will cause dangers to children. One question emerged to, come to my mind. I ask myself, would I, be willing to put my own kids through functional, MRI? It took me a couple of days to think through. And finally, I couldn't convince myself. And it became very personal. I use this example is to demonstrate sometimes ethical decision can be very personal. Scientifically, there's no data to support, functional MRI will cause brain damage to children, right? So, because I couldn't put my kids through that, functional MRI, so finally I give up on that research project. So sometimes the points I'll try to make is ethical decisions sometimes can be personal. And a lot of times you really need to ask yourself a hard question, right? Even if it's very significant study, very important study to do, right? So the second study I'm going to talk about, it's the, talk about interviewing teasing experience, children with who are overweight, right? Their teasing experience in physical education. For this project, as we all know, obesity is very sensitive, especially in urban setting, African-American community. But it's very important research project to look at, because we want to develop a healthy, physically active lifestyle among children who are overweight or obese, right? So there are a lot of ethical issues actually emerged from that project. As we went through IRB data collection, and even we talk about interviewing, maybe later on reporting, we try to publish data. The first one is language to use, right? There are so many terms you can use to represent children who have BMI is larger than 25. Some people use supersized children. Some people use big-sized children. Some people use overweight or obese children. Some people also, others use children who are overweight or obese. Well, different terms has been used, different, talk about different language. Their intention, it's good. It's never think about, want to cause any harm to children with, who are overweight or obese. But sometimes we really need to think about, dig a little deep and ask yourself, assume I were that person who are overweight or obese, when somebody use, hey, you are big or supersized, right? How that will affect my feeling, right? So, and so that's very important thinking that you need to go through, right? Because some children will feel offended if you use big size children, or maybe supersized children, or maybe overweight or obese children, right? I strongly recommend that you use people first language, right? Because there are some reasons. It acknowledge that a person, right, who are overweight or obese is a person first and foremost. So that's very important. The second issue is talk about recruitment. Recruitment, it's, as you know, because we try to look at their teaching experience, right, and also relate to body weight. So pretty much our sample focus on children who has BMI over 25. Well, this has caused some issue, ethical, consideration during recruitment. So when we went to school, we didn't try to recruit children who either maybe with a normal weight or maybe thin student, a student who are thin, right? Or maybe healthy, okay? And that's caused some issues because it make students who are overweight or obese felt uncomfortable because we single out them when we did recruitment, right? So we report to IRB, University IRB, and later on we find solutions. Find solutions. One is we kind of make sure we do a lot of recruitments privately instead of in public, right? And the second solution we had is we recruit some students with normal weight or maybe healthy weight, right? So that will kind of help out in terms of not single out those students who are overweight or obese. And the next ethical decision we encountered was doing observation and also interviewing. When we did observation, sometimes we stood very close to them because we want to see how they react, how they behave in physical education, and also when their peers made some comment, right? How did they feel about those comments, right? So, but that kind of make them, also feel uncomfortable because we kind of brought attention to them because of our presence, right? So this is, excuse me. So how, where are we going to stand, right? In terms of proximity, in terms of to observe their behaviors in physical education. And the other one, we talk about interviewing. During interviewing, as we all know, right? When people talk about their bad experience, they sometimes reluctant to talk about. Sometimes they felt embarrassed, right? Sometimes they feel very sad, emotional distress when they recall those experiences. So there are a lot of things you have to think about during interviews, which means relate back to Dr. Ann, also Dr. Leslie talk about respect their privacy and also respect their feelings during interview. You cannot pressure them to talk and make them feel uncomfortable, right? Sometimes we, as researchers, we want collect data for our research projects, but we really need to think about some strategies and to make them feel comfortable to talk about their experience, rather than force them to give you the data that you want, right? And the last one I will be talking about is during the interview, some participants mentioned about, I want to cut myself. I want to take away my life, my own life. So those are pretty much serious situations, and that's probably what Dr. Leslie talked about, situation to situation, moment to moment ethical decisions we need to make. So this occur not to just to one or two participants. We talk about a significant portion of participants, talk about, children with, who are overweight, obese, because was taught so much in school, not just by teachers, by their peers, also at home by their parents, siblings. I mean, they need some help. So as researchers, when when participants told their feelings, right, their emotions, one ethical decision we need to think about is, should we refer them to professionals and ask for help, right? Because it could happen, what thing can happen is some kids may do it in the future, right? So they may just kill themselves, right? So this is, the ethical decision we need to make is, we need to stop doing the interview. We stop, doing the interview, we stop them and ask if it's okay for us, right? Do you want us to talk to your parents? And also maybe to refer you to some professionals for help, right? So, I mean, in summary,
Yeah. Bakari, something's gone on with our audio.
Did I?
Sorry, Doctor. Yeah, something's wrong with the audio. We're hearing somebody in the background.
Okay.
And I lost you for a little bit, Weidong. I'm not sure whether everyone did. Just for a couple seconds there.
That's no problem. Yeah. LT. Okay. Wow.
Good.
Did I? Okay, good.
You're good. Thank you.
Those are just some, ethical decisions I think I encountered during my research projects. There are probably many, many other situations. One thing I want everybody to think about is, when you do your research projects through different phases, you need to constantly reflect in terms of, did I make an ethical decision in terms of having my participants in my research projects, from IRB process application throughout reporting, constantly reflect and try to become an ethical researcher. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you, Dr. Allen. Thank you, Bakari.
No problem. Yeah, so now we're going to move into question and answer. So if you have any questions that you would like to put in the chat, please let us know. We can have our panelists answer those questions. Just want to thank once again all of the panelists for coming and taking time out of their busy days and their schedules to be here with us and help us have our third in the series of our QualLab lunches, where we focus on, of course, qualitative research and the different issues that go on there. So what I'm going to do is unmute the participants here, and hopefully if anyone has any questions, let us know. Okay. but that doesn't seem to be the case. But just want to let everyone know you can go to our website at osu.edu/QualLab to see our events. We have an upcoming unapologetic educational research webinar featuring Dr. Rich Milner, who is actually an OSU alum. He's going to be speaking on interrogating the ethic perspective and the new focus on race, what's a researcher to do. So just want to once again thank everyone for coming out. Want to once again thank our panelists for coming and sharing their expertise and their experiences with us as qualitative researchers.
Yeah, Bakari, I think we people are showing back up again. We might have we have 15 minutes if we need them,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
Just give people a little bit of room. I'm looking at Dr. Dinora Sanchez-Losa. She's done some really, I think, very challenging work that I'm sure she's got some great thoughts around ethical issues working with teachers and students. I'm not trying to call you out, Dinora, just I know you have some really, really great insights. And I'm seeing several names of students who've done some fantastic work where no doubt they have dealt with or seen the beginnings of ethical issues that they might want to share or get some input on or whatever. So Dinora, did you have anything you wanted to share?
I think I just am full of a lot more questions. And exactly what you were saying, Dr. Moore, I was thinking about, my work and just the question of power. I think when Dr. Allen spoke earlier about issues of justice and when we want to intervene and when we want to share our research, just thinking about the power dynamic between the researcher and the communities that we're in. But I think a lot of times we've been focused on thinking of communities and our participants as perhaps coming from more marginalized communities. But in my case, it was a community that actually had a lot of power in a lot of different ways. And so, I'm still, it's something that I'm continuing to wrestle with. And as y'all were speaking, just thinking about who our obligations are and what our obligations are too. And it might not necessarily be the participants that are face-to-face, but larger justice issues and commitments. And so, that's just, something that
I'm going to invite Anne to speak to that because she brought exactly this issue up when we were planning.
Yeah, and this actually appears, and Dinora, I think that you and I have some interests that cross. And so this appears when you're doing a lot of political work. So your participants are often folks who have quite a bit of power. And the one thing that came to mind actually was I did a study looking at values between two communities related to schools of choice, but really trying to understand the value systems that underlie two communities. And there was a set of findings from one community that was clearly disturbing in terms of the way that community used its power to keep other people out. And it was a real struggle for the research team to think about how it is that we present this data and think about this data in a way that tells the whole story, not just the story of that one community. So I really appreciate that comment. I think it's something that shows up in our work in political research all the time.
Very good. And so we have some questions now. So we have a question from S. Savage. Question is, could you explain any related ethical issues for amending a previously approved IRB study?
That's an interesting question, and it's got a lot of room. Do you have any more details you want to provide? Do you have a specific case you want to ask about? Because generally there's not any obvious reason an amendment's going to raise, amendments raise X kinds of issues. I think there's lots of potential issues. I think one of the big issues that I could see with an amendment is you want to change with whom you're sharing your data. For example, if you want to do playback, stimulated recall kinds of data sharing with participants, and you have not told your participants in advance, yes, I'm going to show this to your teachers or your parents or your therapist or your coach. that's stuff that you got to go, that's got to be an amendment. It's going to require going back to your participants and that informed consent as ongoing process. Any changes that you make in your, any amendment you make, any change you make in your research, first thing you should think about is, and IRB asks you to do this, what impact will this have on your participants? That is your first and biggest, most important question to ask. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Is there anything else that you want to more particularly address in that question?
So if they said no, they said that's fine. So we have one more question. This is from Gerald Tang. What happens if you are doing international research where laws are different in other countries outside of the US? How do you deal with the political impact on your research?
That's big. I could speak to that, but I want to invite Dr. Allen and Dr. Lee to talk to that as well.
Well, I had one situation, I believe there is a research project conducted in China, because I'm from China, I can read Chinese. So I think the IRB office asked me to review a study. They want me to answer a question is how, I cannot remember, 1 second, whether there are any kind of violations of law in China, whether it's legal and ethical to do that research projects in China. I think to my experience, it will be you have to make sure the research projects first apply to the law in whatever foreign country first.
One of the issues that I have run into, I have done research in West Africa, West Central Africa, and I tend to get, as a reviewer, pretty much anything that's set in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the issues that is salient to me is that sometimes researchers appear to be prepared to do research that they don't realize how risky it is for someone living in a particular political system. Or living in a context where there's relationships between the common folk and various forms of authority are very different than our own, although we've got issues here. And so they just don't know enough about that context to realize the dangers. And that has often less to do with law than it has to do with just how things work in reality. And that's where consultants like Dr. Lee was brought in as a consultant on for the IRB. He was not an applicant, he was a consultant. And we need those folks because they have on the ground knowledge about how things function and what would be the actual potential risks for participants. Anne, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to add to the last point, which you brought up in the very beginning of your slide, which is talking about protected persons and the IRB takes great care in thinking about protected persons. And that's one of the things the IRB will do is bring in consultants who know the population, who are able to speak to those very specific issues and weigh in. So I think that's an important part that the IRB plays, and I really appreciate it.
I think what Dr. Sanchez-Losa brought up about power, that's a big thing is that different social systems, structures, power dynamics work differently. There's always power dynamics, always. And they work differently in different settings, and they work differently for people with different social identities within those settings, racial identities, ethnic identities, religious identities. And so you could even have someone from that setting who belongs to one particular group and has no idea of what the experience is of somebody from a different group in that same national context. So these are really complicated issues and need to be taken extremely seriously. I mostly see these issues in dissertation research or master's research because students just haven't had the field experience yet. But I've seen it occasionally in professors as well, that they just don't take seriously these issues of power and risk. Nora, did you have anything to comment on that? You have to unmute?
Yeah, no, I was having someone
oh yeah,
quiet the noise. We have some dishes happening in the background. But I think, no, just one of the things that you were talking about made me think of, just like, the larger questions, I think is what we're getting at, but the small things that we've been taught to do in qualitative training, like member checks, which are not small. I shouldn't say they're small, but like something like a member check, right? Where you ideally are taking your data and showing with your participants to make sure that there is, an accurate representation, right? Again, with folks that maybe hold less power in society or less power relative to you, that would be a really important move to make, to be able to make sure that you're representing what they shared. But if it's a studying up situation, right? Like the member check can only go so far, right? Like if you're studying like the primacy of right-wing movements, for example, right? What kind of member checking are you going to do with what participants are sharing if it might open up a Pandora's box of then having to talk about ideological differences that you might have between a participant, right? Or if you're studying issues of like gender discrimination, right? Like, what would a member check look like with, a person in power to say, or, like a white male executive, right? It's like, so you are discriminating against the women is what you're saying, right? You know what I mean? Like what really would the member check look like? And I think that also kind of points to, what are the ethics in each of those, tools that we have, right? Like what do you share in a member check and for what purpose? And then, yeah.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. So are there any other questions by any of the participants or our panelists before we close out? Okay. Well, just want to say once again that we thank everyone who took time out of the day to be here with us in this virtual reality of Zoom, right? Once again, I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Moore, Dr. Allen, and Dr. Lee for sharing their expertise in qualitative research. And just want to, once again, excuse me, implore everyone to go to our website at u.osu.edu/QualLab and take a look at the several other sessions that we have in the Qualitative Lunch series, as well as our unapologetic tour where we are interrogating anti-Blackness and white supremacy in qualitative research. Thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you, Bakari.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, Dr. Lee, and thank you all the participants. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Do we?
Yeah, I was just staying on to say thank you. I thought that was nice. I think, we were probably always over ambitious thinking we could have breakout groups in an hour-long session. I hope sometime that we'll be able to do, we or some other group will be able to do something that's more interactive around the ethics issues, because there are really interesting ways to do sort of training-like things where we get people to really dig in. And it's hard for people to share in a group, like, here's the ethical issue I've had, because sometimes it's embarrassing. I mean, we've all made missteps, right? Weidong, I really appreciated the very personal tone that you brought to what you did. And that was a really rich dimension to it. And Anne, you had a very, these very related, but just, related enough to have some coherence across the cases, but each really distinct and bringing up different issues. And that was really well articulated. I appreciated that very much.
I felt like I was throwing out questions, but not actually getting to how we handled it. And I think that Denora's point was something that we didn't have time to do all of it, but that I had thought about, which is when you're dealing with people of power, thinking about member checks. So one of the ways that we deal with that is in teams and do, reviews because if you throw that back to some of those communities, they'll just come back and say, I didn't say that. That's not. So, yeah, but that's a whole nother thing.
It is, and the study up, study down thing, we talk about that a lot in the anthropology of childhood and youth group in the anthropology meetings, and it's a really, just the distinction itself is really, really interesting. but it has so many implications. And I think as we've gotten, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, Weidong?
No, are we supposed to stop recording?
Oh, we can, I don't know, are we still recording? We can, I don't know, I don't think I have control of the recording, but we can stop this. Oh, wait.